from its counterparts in times of crisis. This is in partnership with Budweiser. Just to remind you, though, that if you want to get involved with this session, please do so via the chat, the questions and the polls. If you've got a question, make sure it's in the questions tab. That way it doesn't get lost in the chat. And as always, please get involved on social media as well, at WF Summit on Twitter, at World Football Summit on Instagram. Now, football may be one of the oldest sports in the world, the most popular sport in the world in terms of wealth, participants, and global audience. That's association football. But sometimes it's hard for a behemoth like football to achieve consistency across the board in times of crisis. Obviously, when COVID-19 struck, perhaps it wasn't surprising that with the different situations, well, of course, we had different responses for different needs and different circumstances. So you saw the leagues come back, for example, in Germany, Italy, Spain, and England, but not in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Scotland, and so on and so forth. But football has done everything it can to ensure the safe return to competitive action. But there has been plenty of initiative, plenty of resourcefulness, and plenty of creativity shown in other sports too. Take the NBA, for example. They've devised a unique postseason format for their 2020 season restart, taking place at ESPN's Wide World of Sports complex at Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. Tennis, I guess it's been a little bit of everything, hasn't it? They've experimented whilst we've been away with mixed results. Compare and contrast Novak Djokovic's Adria Tour with the Battle of the Brits event, which was organised by Andy Murray's brother, Jamie Murray. And Formula One, of course, really embraced the gaming space with their virtual Grand Prix proving popular, and they managed to leverage partnerships to cross-fertilise with other sports and other areas of popular culture as well. And there are plenty more other examples that we will discuss. So what learnings can football take from its fellow sports, and how have they been addressing the challenges of battling coronavirus and moving forward? We bring in this panel, as I say, in partnership with Budweiser. Your speakers are in Rio, Vice President and Managing Director of NBA Latin America, Arnon de Mello. In Paris, the CEO of Extreme E, Alejandro Agag. In San Francisco, President of the San Francisco 49ers and Chairman and CEO of Elevate Sports Ventures, Al Guido. And in the Hamptons near New York, CEO and founder of Spartan Race, Joe de Sena. And with me here from London, your moderator, leading sports digital exec, and most recently at FIFA, Michael Broughton. We are spanning the planet with this next round table. Michael, it should be a fascinating one. The floor is yours.
And thank you very much, David. Delighted to be back. Delighted to have such a spectacular panel with me. So my job should be very easy today. And mostly my job is to stay out of the panelist way. I think taking on from where David said, historically, sport has always been very resilient. And I think for the first time ever, outside of wartime, COVID has presented challenges to sport that we've never seen before. So this to me is a really interesting time to debate where do we go next, how do we learn from each other to advance sport as an industry. So I think I'm paraphrasing Joe, one of our panelists, who doing one of his videos early on in the COVID experience talked about how no business, not just a sport business, but no business can survive when there's no revenue in and costs are going out. So how do we change our mindset? How do we adapt? How do we move forward? Personally, I'm going back into the sports investment world with Acceleration Equity. So I'm a believer in the future and the upside in sport. So excited today to introduce all the panelists and to get their thoughts on where we're going and how we can learn from each other. So I'll start with you, Al, in San Francisco. Game day in the US has always been a much bigger part of the sports event than you see in typical, say, European football, where we come for the 90 minutes and we leave. There it's very much a spectacle of the day. How is your team's mindset having to adapt to how you produce an event, either via Elevate or via the 49ers, for you fans who are expecting something but can't necessarily come to the arena to watch an event? How is your team adapting to that change?
Michael, it's certainly not easy, that's for sure. But what I would say here is we produce content for our over 10 million fans who are never going to step foot in Levi's Stadium every single day. And so I think to a degree, you can try and change up a lot of the things you do. But frankly, the reason why we have fans, the reason why we're so popular is because people love our sport all over the globe. And so for us, it's how do we get that content into their hands in an efficient manner? Obviously, in the venue, it's going to look very different. We used to talk about customer service. Now we're talking about customer service and customer safety. And you and I talked the other day, in my opinion, COVID really what it's done is accelerate what's already been happening in our world. If you think about what technology has done to in-venue, mobile tickets, contactless, cashless, we're already there. And so I feel like those things were happening for customer service reasons. Now they're happening for customer safety reasons. And so, look, it's not going to be an easy 2020 for any of us, but my opinion is, and we've seen this across the globe with how much people are watching sports right now, there's going to be millions and millions more people who watch our games, and we have a tremendous platform and opportunity to really change the world in a positive way coming out of COVID. And people will look for the sports and entertainment industry to really lead the way.
Thank you. And I think you touched on something there, Al, which I know Martin Sorrell mentioned earlier, where what COVID has done is accelerated both the good and bad changes that we're seeing. Are there any, for example, mobile ticketing or any others that you would particularly highlight around what you and Elevate are doing?
Well, Elevate, I mean, we're all over the globe. We operate in 3 different countries, 14 different states in the US. We represent 7 different sports. You know, Michael, I'll give you an idea. Last night, obviously tuning into Major League Soccer, Inter Miami is one of our clients. To see what they were able to pull off in Orlando, no small feat, as we all know. This is not going to be easy. I personally think, and there was an article yesterday that came out around the future of sponsorship and what that might look like. You open this up with saying revenue not coming in. What I would say, it's incumbent upon all of us to find new ways to get revenue to come in the books, and things that we might have thought were off the books, right? We couldn't do, wouldn't touch. We need to actually start thinking about the ability to do that. And so, you know, whether that's new sponsorship assets that are inside of television broadcast, whether that's new distribution platforms, whether that's escape rooms, whether that's membership. I saw what happened with Barca TV and their membership platform with their fan base. We're all going to have to think through what the future of our revenue streams look like. And we've always broken them down to be content, tickets, premium, and sponsorship. Those will remain the same from my perspective. The question is what does the evolvement look like? What does sponsorship evolve to? What's in the digital and sponsorship or digital world with inside of broadcast that probably didn't happen before? We're going to need to think about those things to fund our sports.
Thank you. Arnon, coming to you next. Picking up from what Al has said there, I mean, I think the NBA has always been seen as a leading innovator in the traditional sports industry. I mean, I still remember your organization standing up on stage talking about WSC technologies, which has transformed the way we create short form content and distribute it. What can we be expecting from the NBA with its restart fast approaching?
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you listening to us today. Al said a lot of things that are true for us as well, for all of us, I believe. But going into this this restart of the NBA season, for us, it's going to be all about enhancing our broadcast experience. As Al was saying, with the NBA as well, 99% of our fans will never be able to go to a live game. So we tackle this issue for quite some time, and this will only accelerate this movement towards that, and having more and more options to our fans to experience that game. I had the NBA Latin America office, and a lot of my challenges are exactly that, because we don't have the game in our region. We have a couple of games in Mexico every year, but that's about it. All of our work is to exactly bring the NBA close to the fans, where they don't get to see a live game every week. So we're looking forward to this challenge. It's not going to be easy. We had the benefit of having, especially the European soccer leagues, going before us. So I think we learned a lot with what they have done. And of course, by having a smaller, yesterday I was just watching the finals here in Rio between Flamengo and Fluminense. It's basically the largest and most important derby of soccer football in our country, and it was a very, very different experience to watch that with an empty stadium and a broadcast that was arranged just a few hours before because there were some issues here with broadcasting rights. So in terms of innovation, I think that all of our fans are going to see something very special. And I can talk a little bit more about that as we go on today.
Thanks very much, Arnon. Now, Alejandro, before I get to the real matter at hand, you obviously have a bit of a history with a certain Formula One driver who's just announced he's coming back to Formula One with Renault, Alonso. In 60 seconds or less, your viewpoint on that.
I think it's great for Formula One. I think it's great to get back Fernando Alonso. I think he's a great champion, and he left probably too early. He was probably the timing of some of his decisions on choice of team were not the ideal one, so that probably kept him from winning a couple more championships, which I think he would have. But I was just texting him now on WhatsApp, and he told me he replied with a very funny phrase, which will resonate with the NBA. He said, "Yes, one last dance." So there he goes. So I think it will be great to see Fernando again racing in Formula One.
Having worked with him myself with McLaren, I'm excited to see him back. Now, with Formula One back, NASCAR's racing, Formula E is close, and obviously your new venture, Extreme E, is deep in the planning. You've obviously pivoted in sport to sport for a purpose, and doing some background reading on what you've been up to. One of the things I came across that really interesting from my perspective was considering the locations you're looking to go with Extreme E. Obviously, you can't, a bit like the other guys have said, you can't take everybody to it. But you've been talking about doing things like virtual hospitality. Explain a little to me, and maybe some of the guys here can learn. And
yes, I mean, Al was just touching on new ways of find revenue, and we came up with this idea of virtual hospitality. We were working on it from earlier, from before COVID, because Extreme E, for those of you who are not familiar, it's a new race championship. It's going to start next year in March, and it's only going to have 5 races in the most remote corners of the planet. So we're going to race in the Arctic. We're going to race in the Amazon rainforest, in a deforested area on the Amazon rainforest. We're going to race in the Himalayas, in a place where there used to be glaciers and now there is no glaciers. We're going to race in the coastline of Senegal, and there is no public. So the whole event is conceived. It was designed without any live attendance. We didn't know COVID was going to happen, but then it happened. So it makes it probably the only sport that it's basically done not to have any spectators there. So we came up with this virtual hospitality, and it's all about giving premium experience to the corporate guests or to the fans at home. But they need to feel they're different. They need to feel that they have either special access, even one-on-one communication with drivers, special onboard cameras, special food, special merchandising. Even we are talking to some of our car manufacturers to have a driving experience in their city with their favorite brand. So, for example, if say BMW is racing in the series, and their partners are inviting those guests, you get this electric BMW to pick you up in your apartment in your city and take you for a spin or whatever. So it's basically taking the experience to the place where people live. We started thinking of this because we're going to be racing in the end of the world, but now with COVID, maybe it can be applied more extensively.
I think that to me, it's a fascinating concept about how you adapt your business, considering it's a very different location, very different times. Talking about different times, Joe, welcome. I've been a keen follower of Spartan. Now, unlike some of the other sports that we see, you don't have perhaps the air cover of, say, a TV broadcast deal, which whilst you need to service it and deliver it, comes with some consequences. You've had some very interesting times to go through. I know early on you had to furlough 75% of your staff, and people take pay cuts. So interesting to hear that. But more interesting, I think, is how you've adapted the business since you've come back. And I know you came back, I think, the 13th, 14th of June. Talk us through how you've had to adapt the model, how you've had to cater to people wanting to take part, but also perhaps being a little nervous about how they take part.
Well, a couple of things. Thanks for having me. And I feel like a superstar being inside the guest here. But we do have television deals, but they're not revenue generators for us. They're really just a method to get part and name out there, top of the funnel, get folks excited about actually sweating and socially undistant, right? So very, very difficult. We had to reinvent ourselves very quickly. We became a content machine, and unfortunately didn't drive a lot of revenue. What it did, though, it spiked merchandise sales. So merchandise sales were up for us 400%, which was amazing. But that didn't fill the gap we needed to fill. So we very quickly started scouring the earth because we had 325 events planned across 45 countries prior to COVID happening. Where would we be let back in? And we had our first event in Jacksonville, Florida in June. And I was nervous. I wasn't nervous because of the virus. I was nervous because the experience wouldn't be the same for consumers. We had so many protocols in place. We had a lessen the number of people that would start off on the starting line. I personally drove down to Florida with my family because I wasn't going to ask consumers or my staff to be there if I wasn't going to be there. And I'm not just blowing smoke. I was pleasantly surprised at how awesome it was. And normally we'd have 8,000 or 9,000 people in an event. This event, we had a couple of thousand calls. And I can't tell you how many hundred people came around a corner, saw me, and just started crying that they got a chance to live again. So I think all the virtual things and initiatives we're talking about are great and a requirement. But I think humans need interaction, even if it's at 6 feet away. And I saw it firsthand. Literally, people just started tearing up and crying. They'd been locked in their homes for so long. They just felt alive again. So France opened back up for us. We just had Taiwan. Hungary's opened up for us. So slowly but surely we're opening. But I need 325 events across 45 countries. So I've actually got a team sitting 12 feet from me right here. The entire New York marketing team has come out for an offsite so that we could reimagine the business while waiting for the world to open back up for us. And it's very content, merchandise, membership, this new imagination.
Well, I think that's really interesting, Joe, because I think many sports have pivoted from saying that they're a sport business to a content business. And that takes me to something that I know was touched on an earlier panel. And Al, you and I discussed this a little bit yesterday. But we're seeing the fan and the athlete have really, in the last few months, stepped into the void of live sports broadcast, right? I don't know of any famous person in the UK now who is not on TikTok. It's gone a little bit crazy. But how do you, as a rights holder and a part of one of the most successful sports in the world, cater to the fact that those athletes of yours, those 54 members of the team, but also those 10 million fans and so on around the world, are now actually creating more content than you, and it could be considered a new premium in that sense?
I absolutely love it, Michael. And I think what Joe said is spot on. I mean, people do want to be back, in facilities, whether it's social distance and seeing the guys. And so I think for us, I think the content piece and a brand, like the athlete brand, the power of the platform has never been bigger. And so, but I keep going back to, again, this was already occurring, right? If you think about athletes using their brand, using their platforms, using their social medias, we've seen athletes be investors, right? We've seen athletes be, social justice sort of advocates, right? We've seen teams work alongside of their players to power both their brand and the team's brand. And then on the user side, Michael, the way that I think about it is, we have, call it 20 people on our content team that are capturing 49ers and or other sports every single day. However, I just mentioned we have 10 million fans all over the world capturing 49ers content. So you have to embrace it. Like, user-generated content is just another form of we call it 49ers Studios, our 49ers Studios team. I mean, if you think about last year, Live Nation Ticketmaster is an equity owner inside of Elevate. They had more of a reaction to tickets go on sale for the NFL season based off user-generated 30-second advertisements versus like studio recorded production quality. Because to Joe's point, like, people want to be in the action. They want to see what happens there. I think about Stadia, that one day when we get to go back and it's full and you see that video, and it might be grainy, right, of someone capturing a moment inside of a stadium and it erupts. Well, what that does to you at home is you sit here and say, man, I just missed out on that. I have the ability to be there. Here's what it feels like to be in that venue. I could never at a team capture the essence of that as much as somebody with a phone could in a venue. And so for me, like, we encourage our players. We teach them, as much as we can on the social media. They're already very good at it, as you mentioned. Like, my daughters, I have 3 daughters, they're already better at TikTok than I'll ever be. I can promise you, right? But we encourage them to use those platforms to engage with our fans, because our fans, every fan of any sport, right? I look at Alejandro's sport, I look at Joe's sport, I look at Arnon's sport. My team obviously has helmets on. Our fans want to know what the guys are like without the helmets on, right? All of these fans of these players, right? These athletes, these entertainers, yeah, they're fans of them on the court, on the pitch, on the ice, in the car, but they also want to know what they're doing at home, what they might be investing in, right? What their passions are. And it's our job as content creators, as stewards of these businesses and these athletes, to allow them to maximize their platform while they have the opportunity.
It's interesting because that to me drives to community and how you build community. And for that, actually, Joe, it'd be really interesting to hear your take, because whenever I've met somebody who's undertaken a Spartan race, they do tend to talk about it like they're a part of something. How have you found that has perhaps knitted the community, both in your staff, but also the broader together? And how can that be learned across football and other sports, to say, if our community comes first, actually we can thrive out of this?
Yeah, I was actually thinking it this morning. We just launched the beginnings of membership, where folks could go back from the beginning, when we started Spartan, and log in and claim the races they've done, how many obstacles they failed, which obstacles, how many burpees they did. And we haven't marketed it all. It's really just in beta. There's about 2,000 people a day going in. And prior to our call this morning here, I started thinking, man, the community is so strong that they're so connected to the brand viscerally, because they did it. They participated. They bled together. And we came into COVID and we said 3 things. We said, obviously, we got to take care of our people. Even though I have to furlough 75% of staff, we have to stay connected to our consumers. We have to stay connected to that tribe we built. And so that's just been enormous amounts of content. I was doing 4 live workouts a day for 90 days straight. So just staying connected to everybody, and then doing these massive Zoom phone call, global Zoom calls. Then we did the largest virtual race the world has ever seen. We registered 3.7 million people in a virtual event, right? So to your point, they bleed Spartan. You can't blame them, right? Because they've bled. They've climbed obstacles. They've crawled under barbed wire. They've done everything they needed to do to get to the finish line. And so their new narrative for themselves and their family is we're Spartans. And we have to keep that connection going. And so we've been doing that, but it doesn't bring in revenue right away. So
it's important, but yeah, there are other priorities as well. Alejandro, I think you're famous with Extreme with Formula E to have included the fan boost and trying to actively get the fan in the stand to be more involved in the race and not just sit there and watch. Talk us through that, the success of it, but also how that might be. You used to be at a football club. How do you take this fan involvement and try and take it into other sports and say, look, there's more to it than just necessarily just watching?
Well, yeah, fan boost is something we made when we started Formula E. And for you who are not familiar, fan boost is basically the fans vote, and then the driver that gets more votes, or in this case, the 3 or the 5 top drivers that get more votes, get an additional boost of energy during the race. And the philosophy of that was first to engage the fans and to allow them to have an effect on the race. And some people were criticizing and saying, yeah, but it affects the result of the race. And we were saying, well, that's exactly the point. Because if it doesn't affect, then why would fans vote for anything? Because the whole philosophy for Formula E is to be between a real race and a video game. And we went one step farther than fan boost when we created what we call the attack mode. The attack mode really is like if you're playing Mario Kart and you get, with your car, you get the star and you go faster. In the real race, you have an area of the optimal race line where you can go over, and if you pass exactly over a certain point in the track, you get additional energy for 4 minutes. And that's the attack mode. So all these things are possible in a new sport like Formula E. I don't know how I would do them in football. For a little bit, well, for 4 years, I was running a football team in London, and those sports have so much tradition also that if you touch things like this, you may get a reaction from the fans that would go like, "Are you crazy or what?" So you have to really find the balance. But with a new sport, it's easier because we don't have the heritage to risk. We can risk whatever we want. So that's the philosophy behind Fan Boost. And in Extreme E, we're going to have I think we call it Hyper Boost. So there's going to be a jump, and whoever jumps longer with the car will get additional energy for certain minutes.
We've had a question in from Mathieu that Arnon, I'm going to bring to you. Where, sorry if I'm just reading it out here. Yes, 99% of fans will never be able to make it to a venue. Do you believe that actually the crisis and actually the pent-up energy behind waiting for sport to come back is actually going to help with the internationalization of sports beyond their traditional markets?
Yeah, I think so. And we are in that position right now with the NBA. We have 13 offices, around the world. We strive for that. We want to be present. We want to be physically present. We believe that this makes a huge difference. And we have, the Latin American market to prove that today. Brazil and Mexico are 2 of the most important markets outside of the U.S. for the NBA. And this new, the technology will continue to enhance our position in those markets where we don't have the game physically being played. Another thing that the restart will be great for us to test and see. One of our biggest challenges was broadcasting games live in Europe and even parts of Asia, Africa, and now we'll have more time slots. Games will start to be played in the U.S. Early afternoon. And we will be able to be on prime time in Europe, Africa, again, those countries, those regions where we usually only came in very late at night or early hours in the morning. So again, this will be another step for us to test and continue to, be more of a global brand, being present, and catering to those fans who are not on our same time zone. again, technology, we're going to be testing a lot of new features. I hope that all of you can take a look at that. We're going to have 30 cameras, different angles that nobody has ever seen. And as Al and even Alejandro were saying, this new fan experience will also come into play. We will test with those experiences that other leagues have had, and we'll adapt also to our reality. Right? We have smaller arenas than football and American football and our football. So we think that we will be able to bring the fan really closer to the action and make ways for them to participate, be it through social media, through those on time interactions, and also having different ways to listen to the game, and also video. So that will be interesting, because up until now, fans have usually had one, maybe two options of watching the game and hearing, one or two broadcasters. Right now, you have from YouTubers to influencers to experts, calling the game. So again, this will bring more options to our fans.
Well,
Michael, I based off.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just if you think about like necessity being the mother of invention, is what they say, right? I think Alejandro's point and Arnon's point, and like what Alejandro and Joe are doing, to me is fascinating in the sense of, they have an idea that they're building from the ground up. And Alejandro, in his time, right, NFL, NBA, like you might consider them sort of ocean tankers, right? They're hard to kind of turn around. And so, because there is so much maturity, right, in some of these businesses and their sport, where maybe the fans might have had a reaction negatively if you tried to change something too much. I think that even during this period is evolving, right? Even what players might be used to or what they might have signed up for. And so now you might see a coach who was like, I'd never mic myself up. That they might now put a mic on to bring fans closer, because we all understand that we are in the most challenging time in our world from a business and sports and economics perspective, right? This has hit every single one of us. And so that necessity to find new ways to engage with fans, not just to get our sports back, because obviously that's tough enough as it is right now on the medical side, and we're all doing the best job we can, but to find new levels of engagement, to find new revenue streams, this in and of itself is forcing us to do that. We have no other choice to think outside the box right now. And I view that as like a tremendous opportunity for the sports and entertainment world, right? Is our fans are more apt, our coaches are more apt, our players are more apt, our front office is more apt to think about doing things that probably 4 months ago we would have never thought we had to do, or it wouldn't even have been on our radar, because frankly, our businesses weren't impacted, right? It's easy when everything is up and to the right. It's much harder in our current world right now. And those who are going to push on the innovation front, what Joe's doing in his house right now, and he's about to do in the next hour, is push on the innovation front to think about the new way Spartan will interact, right, with all of his fans. Same thing with Alejandro, same thing with Arnon, same thing with me. That may have not occurred, certainly wouldn't have occurred probably without COVID. And so I look at it as a tremendous opportunity.
I think you're right. I mean, there's a fantastic book by Matthew Syed called Black Box Thinking, which I think reiterates what you just said there, Al, where innovation needs a catalyst. And the catalyst may have come in the most unexpected way, but it has to be there. And it's interesting, you raised that fans may be a little more amenable to seeing things differ to the way they used to be. I know, Joe, from your experience with relaunching the races, you've had, I think, both ends of the spectrum. Right? You've had a social media hit where people are going, what on earth are you doing? And at the same time, as you say, people literally in tears to be able to engage with other humans again and get out of their house. And, so I think you've navigated this already, or you were in the middle of navigating it. How have you found trying to change things while some people will always want it to be how it was, and others are starting to say, okay, well, I got to do a virtual workout with Joe in half an hour's time.
Yeah, I mean, look, I want it the way it used to be in some ways, but then I also love, the fact that it's pushing us to be better and innovative, like you said, Al. But 30% of the people, I mean, you guys have all done your research. About 30% of the people are just afraid. They're not going to come in a stadium. They're not going to come to an event, and they're very vocal on social media, and they attacked me pretty hard when we started launching events again. But 70% of the people embrace it, follow the new protocols. By the way, I didn't know if our consumers were going to play along. Like the ones that showed up to the event, were they going to break all the rules? And by and large, everybody followed exactly the way they're supposed to. So that was good. And I think we had to just be the tip of the spear. I think we had to step out there, take the chance, and allow other event organizers to say, wait a minute, this can be done, right? CEO of Ironman called me up and said, all right, we're doing an event. So it just, we can't turtle up and say, what are we going to wait for? A cure? Like, it's not happening anytime soon. So, so we got to get on with it. We got to be innovative. And, I guess I was out front, willing to take some bullets if it could have went really wrong, but knock on wood, it went well. And it wasn't like it used to be. I didn't have some of the obstacles because I couldn't, but it was okay. It was fun.
Great. Well, look, we're fast approaching the time where this has come to all too quick close. But one of the things I wanted to get out of everybody before we do move on is, a thought, an insight, or maybe even a book or a podcast. And Joe, you can't quote your own, I'm afraid. Although I would recommend people go and listen and read what Joe has to say, that you think others could learn from. And to get the ball rolling, I'm a big fan of a book I've just been reading called Loon Shots by Safi Bakol, about how you set up an organization, not necessarily culturally, but technically, for it to be able to change, adapt, and grow. So, Alejandro, any recommendations from your side?
I agree completely. You have to take this time of COVID as an opportunity. And you can do many things that before people were not ready to do. I was giving the example of the mic in the coach. In motorsport, the difficult thing is to keep teams from going bankrupt by spending too much. So you have to almost save them from themselves. And COVID has been a good time to impose very tough cost control measures in motorsport. Formula One has done it, we have done it, and this would have not happened without COVID. So you have to take it as an opportunity. You can always go and say this is the biggest disaster ever, but that doesn't help anyone. And there are always things that you can do to turn things around. So that would be probably my advice, following also what Al was saying.
Arnon, any recommendations from yourself?
Well, I'll say something. Listening to our fellow panelists here today, I think we do a great job, especially for us who have sports that happen in the stadium with a lot of people. Where the presence of fans are so important. I think we're doing a great job. Going into the virtual reality and bringing that experience to our fans back at home. But one thing that I think will be a challenge for all of us who are in this space is to actually try to bring the experience back to the arena for the actual players, right? So this is one of the things that I've seen football today on TV, and also seeing what's going to happen in Orlando with the NBA. I wonder how the lack of fans will affect the players and how they feel. So bringing that experience of an arena to the players, I think, will be probably our next big challenge.
Well, Arnon, I think you touched on a good one there, because I think if you look at it statistically, it's certainly in the Bundesliga and I think in the Premier League, the home team advantage is dissipated. So now if you're the Lakers playing in Orlando at home, what does that really mean? Does that give you home court advantage in the playoffs or not?
I'll just say
Al,
that we're going to test with crowds cheering the home team. With the NBA 2K soundbite. So we'll see how that works out.
There is an app out there that actually allows you to do a little bit like Alejandro's fan boost from home, cheering into the app, which will then pipe back. So if you don't know it, I'll dig it out for you. Al, any advice or podcast that you would recommend to people to go and read?
I got two things. One, my good friend Simon Sinek wrote a book called The Infinite Game. I don't think there could be a better read right now, given where we're at. And then a quote that I live by, or at least try to, from one of our partners, Tim Lywicki, who runs Oakview Group. COVID-19 is not the most contagious disease in the world. It's enthusiasm. And I said, leadership is really hard, certainly during these difficult times. So, doing things like this with all of you on here and with everybody listening in, I love being part of this ecosystem. And so let's keep lifting each other up.
That's great. And I would also highly recommend that book, a fantastic one. Joe, over to you.
You got to read Shackleton, The Endurance, right? Locked it in the ice for 2 years, didn't lose a man. I think this would be a great book for all of us. And then it's going to sound like a little bit of selling, but it's not. If you go on Spartan Up podcast, I interviewed a guy named Dan Pena, Pena. You don't have to look at my podcast. You could find him anywhere. I think he would be contagious, enthusiast. Guy is on fire. Dan Pena.
That's fabulous. Thank you all very much for those recommendations. And Alejandro, having started out in Formula One, I too was delighted to see cost caps come in at a starting level anyway. But I think you're all right. We are seeing a change in sports. It's been a delight to have you. And David, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, just a very, very brief sum up of what we've heard there. We started off with some prescient thoughts, particularly from Al, about COVID accelerating what's already been happening. We've reprised a few of these themes before, talking about content and greater access. That's been a bit of a recurring theme, really, through WFS Live. And also hearing from Joe particularly about the notion of community as people bleed Spartan in their largest ever virtual race ever seen, 3.7 million people. And I think not just community, but a sense of both belonging and representing. Not just sort of I'm part of a club, but I'm proud to be part of this club. And I'm proud to share that I'm part of this club and this way of being, and that it's a new narrative. I think it's a really, really good way of describing it. We heard from Alejandro about fan boost and attack mode, two innovations that have been brilliant in Formula E. And yes, admittedly, when you've got a sport which you can design the way you want, those sorts of innovations are perhaps a little bit easier to convince the audience of. We've already seen with football and things like VAR, for example, that there's been a lot of opposition to a number of those things in such a traditional sport, and some really lovely sentiments at the end that we can take home and I'm sure that we can implement. Interesting to hear Arnon say particularly about trying to bring the experience of the stadium back to the players. I think we'll all be looking at ESPN's Wild World of Sports complex at the Walt Disney World Resort very, very carefully indeed to see how both the NBA and MLS deal with that. But already we've seen with virtual fans and augmented stadium sound in football, particularly La Liga, that they've been trying these innovations. And indeed, speaking from a personal point of view at Sky Sports, we've been doing exactly the same. Sky Sports crowds, highlights options, watch-alongs, trying to make the fan a more really integrated part of the broadcast, of the entire experience as a whole. Because as Michael rightly pointed out, the fan and the athlete have filled the void when live sport's been away. And now the fan is really part of that action as well. I've got the Infinite Game written down, and Shackleton, the Endurance, and Dan Pena, and that is my Thursday night sorted. Thank you very much indeed to all of our contributors, Al, Joe, and Arnon for joining us from the Americas, and also Alejandro and Michael for directing the discussion so expertly here in Europe. So we're going to take the briefest of breaks, but in 5 minutes' time, we are back with the hub of innovation, technology's critical role in the new normal. It's in partnership with Pixelot, but I'll leave you with a word from our partners from this last session, Budweiser. See you very shortly.